Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. By Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the t:slim X2 insulin pump. And by Real Good Foods. Real food you feel good about eating.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, the new Dwayne Johnson NBC show The Titan Games premieres this week, and Chris Ruden, a previous guest who lives with Type 1, is one of the contestants. You may have seen Chris in the commercials. He wears a prosthetic arm. Here's what he said happened when he got the call he'd made the show.
I lost my mind. I said a lot of words that just didn't even make sense because I was so excited. And it was just surreal. And it was surreal all the way up into the moment where I came home from the Titan Games. I still didn't believe I did it.
Chris talks about what he can in advance of the show airing, and he tells us how the mental burden of Type 1 and the challenges of being born with only 2 fingers on his left arm and a shorter left arm led him to the incredible path he's on now. He's got some great advice for all of us. Plus, what is the T1D Fund? Have you heard about this from JDRF? And something new on the show this year, good news straight from you. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to Diabetes Connections. I'm Stacey Sims. Happy New Year. A lot going on in this first episode of 2019. A lot of new stuff on the podcast. Welcome back if you're a longtime listener. If you're new, we aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connections, talking to celebrities and athletes and leaders in our community, as well as doing hard news interviews with healthcare companies and tech folks, and really trying to get you information that is useful, as well as sharing stories that are inspirational. My son was diagnosed right before he turned 2. He is now 14, so we're more than 12 years into diabetes. My husband lives with type 2. I don't have any kind of diabetes. My background is in broadcasting, local radio and television news, and that is how you get the podcast. I was so excited to talk to Chris Ruden. I have seen him a couple times in the last year or so. First talked to him really almost 2 years ago here on the podcast, and I'll link up that past episode in our show notes. I had heard some rumblings last summer that he was auditioning for something, but you know how these reality shows are. They keep everything under wraps. And, you know, when you'll hear in the interview, Chris could only share so much, and hopefully we can check back in with him as the Titan Games progress. But what a cool experience. I'd urge you, as you listen, to think about joining our Facebook group. It really is where I post the most up-to-date information, surveys, and things that are going on. Because, you know, with a podcast, it's once a week. Sometimes I tape it a little bit further in advance. So if you really want to stay up in more real time, I would definitely urge you to join the Facebook group and do that. It is Diabetes Connections, the group. And I always link it up every week in the show notes, and you can find those at diabetes-connections.com, or you can find them in whatever podcast app you're listening to. There's always a little note there that says details or more info. Usually if you click that, you'll find the show notes. And we are just about everywhere you can think of. Man, in the last year, Pandora and Spotify and Stitcher and all these places, you know, have podcasting now. So, of course, we're on Apple Podcasts as well, and Google Play, whatever iteration that is in. Basically, wherever you listen to audio, you can find the podcast. A big thank you to our sponsors. As you'll hear, we have added some new ones this year, and I really appreciate their support. And they keep the show free for you. A lot of podcasters will ask for money or donations to keep it going. This show will be free. You will not pay for it. That was one of my goals at the very beginning. So I am thrilled that we have some new folks on board to help us out and some old friends returning. Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. One Touch has been a trusted brand in blood glucose management for more than 30 years. This past year, Pharmacy Times and U.S. News & World Report named One Touch as a #1 pharmacist-recommended brand in blood glucose monitoring based on a survey of pharmacists nationwide. Find out more about One Touch brand products at diabetes-connections.com and click on the One Touch logo. My guest this week is one of the contestants on the Titan Games. This is that Dwayne Johnson NBC show with incredible athletic challenges based a little bit on American Gladiators from way back when. It's got a little bit of American Ninja Warrior to it. You've likely seen some promos. They started running during Sunday Night Football in the fall, and they've been all over social media. Here's the clip featuring our guest, Chris Ruden.
My name is Chris Ruden, and I'm a motivational speaker. I was born with 2 fingers on my left hand and a shorter left arm. I spent 17 years hiding my disability. This competition is a huge opportunity for me to show kids with a disability or who are struggling that they can do it, that there is no limitation.
Because Titans aren't born, they're made.
Chris Ruden is an elite power lifter. He's also an entrepreneur. He's a motivational speaker. We had him on the show, as I said, 2 years ago. Interestingly, on the Titan Games, in these promos at least, not the show itself because we haven't seen that yet, but they focused on Chris's prosthetic arm. No mention, as of this taping, of the fact that he lives with type 1 diabetes. I am curious to see if they mention that at all. As you'll hear, we spoke before the first episode aired. There's a lot Chris cannot tell us, but there's an awful lot he can. Here's my interview with Chris Ruden. Chris, thanks again for coming on. I know how busy you are. I'm so excited to catch up with you. It's been a while since we talked.
Thank you for having me. It has been quite a while, and so much has happened since we talked. I'm excited to kind of divulge that.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's just jump right in, because we want to know about the Titan Games. Now, I should say, we are speaking to you at a time after it is taped, before it goes on the air, which I know can be a very tricky time to talk about reality television. So I may push you here, but I don't want you to get sued. So I understand.
They can sue me for more than everyone listening could afford. So
right.
Unless we start like a GoFundMe, I don't think I can say too much. But I'm excited to say what I can say.
All right. So tell us from the beginning. How did you find out about this? What happened to get you even to try out for the Titan Games?
Man, okay. So I was like normal. After I go to the gym, I'm working at night. It was about 10 at night, and I'm in my office, and I got a message saying they were some producer or whatever, and they wanted to interview me. And I'm like, this sounds super shady. I don't believe you, He's like, we'll hop on a video call. I'm like, okay, this is getting weird, It's late at night. You want to do a video call? I don't know how I feel about that. I was like, all right, what's the worst that could happen? I could always close my laptop, And we ended up doing this interview for an hour, and I was like, wow, this sounds kind of legit, hosted by The Rock, on NBC, from the makers of American Ninja Warrior, all this stuff. I'm like, wow, that sounds super cool. I'm not really an athlete like that because I'm more of a power lifter, but that's a cool opportunity. I let that go for a few months, and I just figured that nothing was going to come from it. And I got the message that they're like, hey, we're going to need you to come out and do the combine, where we put you through a rigorous physical test. And 2 things came in my head. I'm like, 1, no way, you're lying to me. And 2, holy crap, I am not in shape like that, so I need to go run right now.
All right, so wait, let me stop you right there, because as someone who, works out at the gym 3 days a week, half an hour at a time, what's the difference between you're a power lifter, I look at you and you're in amazing shape, and doing a combine?
I think that's what most people don't understand is, like, you can't really tell someone's physical abilities by the way they look. I know people that have shredded abs and they get tired walking to the refrigerator, So for me, I'm more about lifting really heavy weight 1 to 3 times, whereas that is repetitive muscular endurance. You need cardiorespiratory fitness to be in shape to maintain that. So it was more cardio based and I'm more strength based. So I had to switch my modalities a little bit to train for this. In my head, I was like, I'm just going to go to the combine and, maybe I'll do okay. But, I do have a physical disability. I do have type 1 diabetes, and a lot of these people don't. Actually, none of them did, So I was like, I'm going to give it my best and see what I can do. I ended up doing that and not patiently waited to see if I made it. And I made it. I made it officially on the Titan Games hosted by The Rock.
What was your reaction when you got that call?
I lost my mind. I can't say my reaction because I'm trying to be nice, but I lost my mind. I said a lot of words that just didn't even make sense because I was so excited. And it was just surreal. And it was surreal all the way up into the moment where I came home from the Titan Games. I still didn't believe I did it. It was just the craziest experience that I've ever had in my life.
All right, so you get this phone call, you're freaking out. How long did they give you? Do you have to like pack your bag and go the next day? What happens?
So they're a little last minute, but NBC is amazing at accommodating us, and doing everything we needed to do. So when they finally got us out to where we were filming, there was a lot of back stuff we needed to do, like different photos and videos and all this stuff. So we had to do a lot of stuff before we even started competing. And I got to see a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, which was really cool to be a part of, and meeting The Rock was awesome. Engaging with him, actually participating on the show was cool, but I think the coolest part was hanging out with all the other contestants before the competition and like really becoming friends with everyone from all different walks of life. And it's crazy. Now I have an extra 60 plus friends that are around the country,
But you said nobody else has a disability or a condition. I mean, you wear a prosthetic on your arm. You have type 1 diabetes. I kind of assumed that there were other people on the show. They were looking for interesting and people facing challenges. Nobody else?
There could have been one other person who had challenges, but in my specific case, there was no one similar to me. I can honestly say I was the only type 1 diabetic, that's for sure. Yeah, it was definitely different, and it was cool to see, to educate people about diabetes, because they didn't really understand, like, wait, why do you look like the way you do, but you have snacks with you? Like, why are you eating Sour Patch Kids? Isn't that going to make you fat? I'm like, oh, okay. So here's a perfect moment to educate you guys. I'm currently dying, and I need this to survive.
I mean, we laugh about it, and you're great about educating. But that honestly had to be a great moment for those people to learn more about it.
It was really cool, and I took every opportunity to do that, from the producers to the actual contestants. Everyone was very accommodating, and it was awesome on that part, on the education part, but it was also awesome on the experience part where I wasn't letting it hold me back. I did the best that I could, and that was the biggest, like the most satisfying part of this whole experience, is knowing that I did something that a lot of people couldn't do. And I did something with a disability, with diabetes, with all these things that most people would consider an obstacle. I turned that into my own opportunity and made the most of it for myself.
You mentioned meeting Dwayne Johnson. I assume he wasn't there for all of the taping. I mean, we know how these things work. But what was that like? What did you guys talk about?
He is just such a cool, down-to-earth person, and being the busiest actor in the world, I presume. He took his time out for us, and I'm super appreciative of him hosting the show and being the executive producer. And he's just exactly what I thought him to be. Just a very humble, down-to-earth person. That's pretty cool, because sometimes you worry. He seems so nice. I did, because I grew up, playing with his action figures as a wrestling fan, Not going to lie, I still have them. It took everything not to bring them with me. I was going to ask. But I didn't want to seem like that creeper. I've always been a fan of his, not just for movies and stuff, just how he treats people, especially kids. He takes time out for kids, and that means a lot to me. Yeah, it really does. That's great. Were you able to spend time with him? I mean, I don't know how much interaction you'd have in something like this, but were you able to have more than one conversation? We definitely had conversations. That's about as much I can say on that. But I definitely encourage people to watch the season and to see what happens. All right. I have to ask you one more thing, and I know you can't answer. Did you talk to him about diabetes at all? I did not specifically talk about diabetes to him. We're not going to see The Rock check his blood sugar on the show. No, that would be super cool. Trust me. If I could, I would, but I don't want to go to jail for assault, Let's talk a little bit, Chris, about you. I'm hoping that people listening to the podcast this week have listened to the previous episode you were on in February of 2017, which I really felt like you were on about 3 months ago. I was surprised when I looked that up. Right. But you were diagnosed with type 1 at the age of 19. And I think it's important to explain, again, as you listen, if you're not familiar, you were not a bodybuilder since you were, 12 years old. Yeah, not at all. Can you take us through that story again, if you don't mind, about your diagnosis? Right back to Chris in just a moment. But first,
Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom, and one of the best things about using the Dexcom G6 mobile CGM system is that share function. As a parent or a caregiver, a spouse, a friend, you can use a separate Dexcom Follow app and help the person you care about manage diabetes in real time. As a parent, this gives me so much peace of mind. Even as we change things up as Benny gets older, he has more independence, but it really is an amazing safety net to give us peace of mind. You can use the Dexcom G6 with iOS or Android now as long as there's an internet connection. It's approved for adults and kids ages 2 and older with diabetes. For more information, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Chris sharing his diagnosis story.
Absolutely. So at the time, I wanted to go to school for law, and I was in the political science program. And I was still struggling with body image issues, which I always hid my disability. I was born with physical disability, for those people who don't know, 2 fingers on my left hand and shorter left arm. And when I was diagnosed with diabetes at 19, I was in the hospital and I knew I needed to do something. And I was never personally motivated to help myself. I was more motivated to help other people, which made me help myself. So I started thinking about things I could do. And I was just getting into exercise. I was tiny. I was like 120 pounds soaking wet. I just looked like a flat board, I had no muscle. I have pictures to prove this too. And I was like, okay, maybe I can do something with fitness, because that helps me get through my struggles mentally, physically. And mentally for me, that's the biggest issue, dealing with adversity, dealing with a disability, or dealing with a disease. The mental tediousness of day in and day out having this condition, that's harder than taking my insulin and taking my glucose, That's the easy part for me. The mental struggle is what really got me. So exercise got me through that. And then I started taking it serious as a career, ended up switching to exercise science and getting my bachelor's degree and creating the entire business that I have now because of diabetes. The obstacle in my way at the time became my way, because I chose it to be so. I chose to do something more than say, poor me, pity me. I chose to, what can I do with where I am, with what I got right now? And how can I help influence other people and impact other people's lives through adversity? And diabetes was that message.
And I've seen you, you have this great service. I'm not going to turn this into a commercial, but, periodically you have a way for people with diabetes to be coached by you. I'm curious what you have learned by coaching people through, as I observe it, it looks like weight loss, building muscle, eating better, being part of a community. I'm curious what that's done for you.
So I have a bunch of clients right now, and I work with hundreds of type 1 diabetics. I'm never about pushing my service, but what I will say is weight loss is a secondary goal. And every single person I deal with, I teach this. So you guys are going to get a free lesson right now. You can just PayPal me about $99. No one wants to lose weight. No one does. No one wants to lose weight. And they're like, what do you mean? That's my goal. I want to lose weight. I 100% want to lose weight. I'm like, no, you don't. I was like, if you want to lose weight, take your shoes off. You just lost weight. Are you happy? No. Okay. What happens if the scale was 30 pounds down and you looked the exact same? Would you be happy? They said no. So I'm like, oh, you don't want to lose weight. You want to look like you lost weight. They're like, yeah. I was like, no, you don't. And they're like, what do you mean? We just figured this out. I'm like, no, you don't. You want to get the feeling of looking like you lost weight. At the end of the day, it's an emotion. You want to feel confident. You want to feel better with yourself. There's an emotion you want, and you think you will get that emotion from weight loss. When in reality, we can convince ourselves to be confident in our own skin right now while moving forward positively. So the biggest thing I've learned with dealing with clients, whether they're type 1 or not, is that we have to build our self-esteem. We have to build our confidence. We have to be able to build the way we see ourselves right in our moment, regardless of how we are now. Whether you're ripped and lean or not ripped and lean, you still deserve to be confident and happy. Now let's also make you healthy. That's what I've learned in this game. It's not about abs. It's about quality of life. And that comes from inside your mind first.
Wow. When you go through that kind of a program and you have lost the weight and you have gained the muscle and you've done everything, what do people say? Do they most often admit you were right about the feeling?
What's funny is I do like some challenges that are more affordable so I can get a group of people, type 1 diabetics. And sometimes they won't join up again. I'm kind of sad. I'm like, man, They did it once and then they quit. You know, that sucks. I really wanted to help them. I got a message from a girl a month ago and she's like, hey, Chris, I did your first 2 challenges like almost 2 years ago. And then I used what you taught me and I ended up losing 35 pounds and I've never been happier. I'm like, oh my God, you took what I gave you, you learned and you kept going. That's the ultimate goal for me, is not to string you along. I want you to learn and live the rest of your life with this concept. And for me, that was the biggest sense of fulfillment, that she learned enough to do this on her own and it helped.
That's great. Let me ask you about your prosthetic arm, if you don't mind.
So
I know you don't mind, because I accosted you at the bakery at Friends for Life at the conference over the summer at Disney, and so I apologize for that. I had so many questions.
No, I love it. I absolutely, there is so much to talk about and catch people up on, because at the time when we were talking, I was still, our first podcast, I was still hiding my left hand under a glove.
Yeah.
And I hid my left hand under a glove for 17 years. And it wasn't until November of last year that I took my glove off. So for 17 years, I hid my hand from my girlfriend, from my friends, from everyone. I always hid my hand. So this is a huge, huge moment for me.
What led up to that?
I told myself that if I ever got a prosthetic arm, I would take my glove off and get more comfortable. I tried to create a scenario that wouldn't happen, so I'd always be comfortable. But after a year of fighting for that prosthetic arm, I finally got it in November of last year. And it was the big moment where I was like, okay, I have to take this glove off. And I'm a go big or go home type of person. So like, instead of just taking my glove off, let's make a video and let's show it to the entire internet and just close the laptop and hope people don't make fun of me and hate me. Well, that video went absolutely viral on Reddit and Facebook and YouTube. Right now it's at 900,000 views. And my other video talking about my prosthetic is at 2.5 million views on YouTube. Led to the Washington Post and a bunch of other spin-off articles written about me, talking about showing vulnerability and overcoming, disability. And now I have a super cool robot prosthetic arm that is just so sick and so much fun. But yeah, a lot has happened.
All right. Well, before we move on to that moment in November and the prosthetic arm, when you say you hid it in a glove, just in case people don't understand, I mean, when the pictures that we used last year, or excuse me, in 2 years ago now for the podcast, it was you wearing the glove. It almost looks like you're only using it to power lift, right? Like a lot of people, I would assume, wear gloves. Like you'd wear, like in my world, you wear gloves to play golf. So,
yeah.
It wouldn't be that different to wear it to lift weights, but you wore it all the time.
I wore it every single day. I slept with it. They're fingerless gloves, and I have no fingers that are straight like that. So, I mean, obviously everyone knew, and my arm is shorter. So it's not like I was hiding from myself, and I was hiding in plain sight. Originally I adopted the glove because for 17 years I wore the glove, but before that I stuck my hand in my pocket because I was made fun of. There was points where I went to school and I had my backpack on, but I accidentally put my hand over my backpack and into my pocket, and I couldn't take my backpack off without going to the bathroom because I didn't want anyone to see my hand. So there were moments where I ran the PE test, running a mile with your hand in your pocket, going to a school dance with your hand in your pocket. Yeah, it was a struggle. And this is a lot of stuff I didn't talk about openly to people because it was that last thing that I swept under the rug and pretended like it wasn't an issue. So finally coming out of that, I can't explain how I feel to have that last little bit of weight lifted off me.
I am so thrilled for you. That's just wonderful. It's so hard. It's hard to hear how it used to be. So I can't imagine how hard it was to live that way. But now that you're open about it, and I mean, more than 2 million people have seen you be open about it.
I mean,
you can't hide it anymore. Tell us about the arm. You said it's like robotic. It's cool. What does it do?
Okay, so this company, Hanger Clinic, they're the same company that made the prosthetic for the dolphin in that Disney movie, The Dolphin Tale.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they worked with me, and I have a very different case because most people have lower body amputations. Uppers are very rare. Now, on top of that, I don't have just a amputated hand or arm. I still have some of the fingers. So to make this, they had to make it completely custom. We ended up coming up with a carbon fiber design for the arm, and it's a myoelectrical device, meaning it picks up signals in my forearm, on the top and bottom of my forearm, to open and close the hand. I have 21 different gestures, and it can even do the middle finger, which is You never know when that comes in handy down in Miami for traffic, So I will admit that I had that function. That was the first function he taught me, my prosthetist. And I was speaking at an event and it got stuck in that position and I was hiding it. I'm like, oh my, that was like traumatic. I'm like, please just get it off. So I took that function off for a little while because of some traumatic experience. But it's so cool. And when I see kids now, when I talk to them, they're like, oh my God, you are the Terminator. You're Iron Man. They have all these little stories in their head. And I explain to them, this is a part of me, but it's not who I am. I'm comfortable with who I am. And I don't just hide under the prosthetic anymore. So I like showing people that I am different now. I'm comfortable with what made me uncomfortable before. And I chose to get the black carbon fiber design, even though they offered a skin tone one, because I don't want to pretend to be normal anymore. I want to be unique and be okay with being unique.
More dumb questions from me. I'll just ask you. Does the prosthetic, do you take it on and off?
Yeah,
do you sleep in it? Is it painful?
I don't sleep with it. I take it on and off when I want to do like fine motor skills. So another selling point for me of getting the prosthetic was only having one hand. You do double the damage to the one hand. So carpal tunnel and cubital tunnel are a very serious thing for me. And with diabetes, that's another common issue as well. So carpal tunnel in my right non-affected limb is getting pretty bad. My grip strength is just not there anymore and it fatigues very easily. So now this prosthetic hand allows me to do other things like grab things and little things that most people take for granted I can do now. And I don't tax my right hand as much.
How long does it take? You said your prosthetist, is that the right way to say it?
Prosthetist.
Sorry. I'll get there.
It's a very complicated word.
Prosthetist. When you're training with someone like that, is it like physical therapy? I mean, is it really like learning to use your hand and your arm again?
It was insane. I actually have the video on YouTube. I'll probably link it up for this so people can see it. It took me maybe 20 minutes to learn how to use the arm.
That's it?
That's it. That's literally it. It's connected to an app on my phone so I can watch the signal strength of like when it opens and closes. And I can literally see the waves and how to contract better. And I can do all this stuff. So we spent like an hour in the office where he was fitting me. I put it on. I was messing around with it, opening and closing it. And I went home with the arm and I'm like, oh, I can do this. So obviously it still takes a lot of practice to develop fine motor skills. Like recently I was able to crack an egg with it, which is really cool, be able to control the pressure and not smash it. But if you see some of my first videos on Instagram, I was holding a cup, trying to drink a cup with Diet Coke in it, and my hand just like smashed the whole cup. It went everywhere. It was hilarious. It was so funny. But I broke a lot of stuff, but that's just me trying to figure out what to do. And he told me just don't drive with it until you're comfortable. I'm like, you mean drive with it immediately? Try that. My hand got stuck on the wheel and wouldn't open. I had to disconnect my hand, and then my hand is just spinning around the wheel. And that was a fun time.
Not quite a rule follower there.
I don't really like it. I think that's why I have to work for myself. I'm surprised I haven't fired myself yet, but it's getting close.
One of the things I've noticed as you bring up Instagram is that you are just a little bit irreverent on social media. I see a lot of donut pictures. I like being open about my life. I am not held back by diabetes. I do enjoy donuts. I have a donut tattoo. Like the kids at Friends for Life and all these conferences love it. And I explain to them, I don't eat donuts every day. But what I do is I show people that we do not have leprosy. We have diabetes. We can learn to use insulin. We can use medication to replicate the system and replicate blood sugar management in a non-affected person. So I don't suggest that you eat dozens and dozens of donuts. I don't do that, and we are not impervious to calories. We will get affected by calories, but I live my normal life and I live my life on my terms, and I do not cut my quality of life for my condition, and my condition is very managed. So I fully believe that when you are comfortable and capable of managing your sugar, there are literally no limits. I'm curious, do you use a pump, a CGM, anything like that?
I'm going to talk about this personally first. Everyone should find what works for them and consult their diabetes management team to see what works for you, not just in terms of blood sugar management, but also quality of life. Because personally, I don't care if you have an A1C of 3, but your quality of life sucks. I go on and off the pump regularly because I'm comfortable doing so, and I have a system down with that. So when I'm on a pump, I'm using a T-Slim with a Dexcom, and I love that. It's great. But there are drawbacks to every solution, with being tethered, having to charge it, all these things, come into play. And depending on what I'm doing in the gym, if I have to wear a belt all the time and I don't really want the pump on, then I go off to Tresiba and shots. And I've been balancing that for years. I've been constantly going back and forth just because that gives me the most freedom in my life. And that's my personal choice. That doesn't work for everyone, but I found it worked for me, and I will continue to do what works for me and trying to improve, Well,
I ask it too because from the little I know about the weightlifting world, there are some athletes who use insulin and don't need it. There's some weird ways that people are using insulin and steroids, and so there's syringes. And then also the second part of my question would be, you're really muscly. And I was wondering if using a pump is hard because you don't have a lot of areas to pinch up and put the pump on. I told you we were going to get personal.
So I will talk about the first part. A lot of people, especially non-diabetics, ask me, like, hey, does that insulin help you? Because I know a lot of bodybuilders take it. Insulin is one of the most anabolic substances in the world. It can help people build a crazy amount of muscle mass. But bodybuilders take that because they have a counter-regulatory system to combat the negative effects of insulin. As a diabetic, insulin may help me build muscle when I'm eating and all this stuff, but when I go low or when I go high, that muscle mass can start to decrease. I can lose muscle mass from having a high blood sugar, having low blood sugar. So it evens out, or it's just not beneficial at all. It doesn't help me get bigger because of all the other effects. In terms of putting the pump on, I have tons of fat in the right areas to place my pump. So my booty cheeks got more than enough meat to put a pump on. And I usually put the pump on my butt. That's just where I'm most comfortable. I don't like anything in my stomach anymore. I used it for so long that I started to get the lipohypertrophy, scar tissue. And I wear my CGM on my arms. I'm just most comfortable with it on my arms.
I will add, Chris, I asked that question mostly for parents of kids who are starting to work out and are getting really muscly and want to know about pump sites. And for some adults, we know each other well. I don't want to get too personal.
Yeah, no, generally speaking, like butt usually retains the most amount of fat. That's the easiest place to put it. But I've seen so many different places. I've seen people who are less than 10% body fat. They wear their pump sites on their thighs. They wear it super crazy areas. You barely need any subcutaneous tissue to use the pump site, especially with certain sites, infusion sets. They can go at an angle, or they can be really minimal. So there are ways around it when you're that lean, especially for student athletes. But you can just find what works for you, and there's always something that accommodates for low body fat.
When you were on the Titan Games, what system were you using?
I used my pump and my Dexcom. And right before the combine and before the actual show, I would disconnect the pump about 20 minutes before I went on.
I'm just wondering if we would see a peek of any of the equipment. I know you haven't seen it.
I hope that we get to see at least the Dexcom.
Dude, that'd be great, just to have people start talking about it.
Oh, for sure.
What was that? Let me ask this question two ways. What do you hope the diabetes community sees when they watch the Titan Games? And then what do you hope the regular viewers get out of it?
With anything like a show like this, or any show or anything public, I hope that people see effort and they see possibility and they don't see limitation. I hope that they understand that I am no greater or no worse than anyone else in the world, and everyone can do what I am doing if they put their work ethic and their mind to it and they actually believe that limitations are self-imposed. So I hope people see possibility. I hope people see lack of limitation. I hope people see success in themselves through what I'm doing.
And one more question, if I could. I'm curious what you would say to that kid who was playing with the action figures of The Rock and was hiding his hand in his pocket, hadn't yet been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I mean, if you go back and talk to yourself then when you were really struggling, what would you say?
Keep going. Regardless of what gets thrown at you, whether you get knocked down flat on your face, keep going. It will get better because you will choose to make it better. Honestly, there's nothing I would change. There's nothing I would do differently. I had to go through my period. It took me as long as it took me to get comfortable. I don't wish anything less or more. I'm exactly where I need to be in this moment. and I will continue to push forward because of my struggles. Don't struggle for no reason. If you're going to struggle, which that's, a commonplace in life, struggle to move forward, not to be held back.
Chris, it's so inspiring every time I talk with you, not just because of words like that, but because of your sense of humor, your willingness to share all with us. I appreciate it so much, and I am thrilled for you. I'm glad I talked to you now, because I have a feeling you're going to have an agent and a manager the next time we speak.
I will always be my ridiculous self. I'm super fancy. I don't care how much money or success I have. I'll wear crappy basketball shorts and a torn up t-shirt, because that's just who I am. I'll never lose that sense of giving back and helping. I'm actually loosely working with a type 1 diabetes nonprofit in Africa right now.
Wow.
We're planning a trip to Uganda, and I am trying to help people who are actually struggling. There's kids who are dying because they don't have access to insulin. I still help JDRF. I just don't believe that all efforts need to be put in one pot. I believe a lot of people need help, and we should learn to spread our help evenly throughout the world. So don't ever think I will be too good for anything like that. I promise you. I do want to say one extremely important thing that I don't think the listeners understand yet. So I'm going to make them understand. Are you ready for it?
Go for it.
You guys don't understand. I'm talking to listeners right now. Stacey, you don't listen to me right now, okay?
Okay.
You guys don't understand how lucky you are to have Stacey doing something like this. This podcast, this message that she gets out to the world has helped so many people, and so many people have talked to me about her that I just haven't told her yet. You guys have to understand what she's doing and take this message, take any message she gives and apply it to your life. Make something of it. Let it impact you. Don't resist it. The messages she puts out to the world are doing so good. I hope she knows that, and I hope you understand, Stacey. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing this for everyone, not just me, but for the kids and the parents and everyone it helps.
You stink, Chris.
I'm so serious.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, I have to leave it there because now I'm dead. That was very nice of you.
It's the truth. It's the truth.
All right.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I obviously did not know Chris was going to say that at the end. I got pretty emotional, as you heard, and I am going to smack him the next time I see him, and then I'm going to give him a big hug. That was so nice of him. That really meant a lot to me. Shortly after that interview, Chris announced that he was traveling to Uganda. He went there in December, where he shared his story of overcoming adversity to children living with diabetes there. I will link up the GoFundMe and more information. The trip is over. My understanding is that donations can still be made. I'd love for you to take a look at that. I know we didn't talk about it in the interview. He hadn't announced it at that time, but what an incredible thing to do, especially at a time when he could be sitting at home and just doing press for the Titan games and, waiting to show the world, hey, I'm going to be on NBC. But, he went to Uganda and really is working hard to educate people about what can be done there. So I salute you, Chris. I think that that's a guy who really puts the work in, not just the hard work of lifting weights, but the hard work of giving back to our community and the hard work of making podcast hosts cry. Again, thank you very much, Chris. And all of the links to all of the things we talked about, including his trip to Africa, will be at diabetes-connections.com. In our community connection this week, what is the T1D Fund? When I traveled out to California late last year for the Diabetes Mind D-Data Conference, I was very pleased to meet Karen Jordan. She is the president of the JDRF Greater Bay Area Chapter. And it's always interesting to talk to people who've been on the board for a long time, and she's been very much involved in JDRF. But one of the things that came up that I hadn't heard a lot about was the JDRF T1D Fund. This is venture philanthropy, and I really wanted to learn more and to bring this to you. If you haven't heard about it, it's fascinating stuff because they're really using more commercial investments to pay for the things that we all need. This isn't your walk money that we're talking about, as you'll hear. So here's my interview with Karen Jordan, and we start out by talking about her daughter's diagnosis. Let me ask you a little bit about your personal story, if I could, Sure. Because you have a child with type 1. When did you join the community? When was she diagnosed?
the best community that no one wanted to join. Right?
What a lousy great club.
I know. So she was diagnosed a little over 10 years ago on Mother's Day weekend. So I spent Mother's Day in the hospital. And she was 13. Thankfully, we caught it early, just more of a fluke than anything else, I think.
Was it a checkup?
No, so she just came home. It was in May, and she said, I kind of been drinking a lot. And we have a neighbor who's has 2 sons with type 1. And I thought, this little voice in my head said, diabetes? Nah. But I just called the doctor anyway, and the doctor said, come in whenever it's convenient. Happened to have a free afternoon, so we brought her in, and they did a finger stick and said, you go straight to the hospital. So, thankfully we weren't in a more dire situation, but...
Well, 10 years, I'm sure to her seems like a long time, but it isn't that long a time. You've become really involved with JDRF and the local and national and international. How did you jump right in? Did you give yourself a little time to adjust?
It was kind of funny because I didn't think I jumped right in, but our neighbor sat on what was then a branch board, which no longer exists in our chapter, but the Silicon Valley branch board, and he said, hey, you should join the board. I kind of went, sure, not knowing what that meant, but then just kind of from there, it's been the chapter board, the international board, the different committees, and now the board of the T1D Fund, which I think is a really interesting vehicle.
Tell me a little bit more about that. I'm not that familiar with that fund.
So the T1D Fund is a venture philanthropy fund, which most people say, what is that? So think of it as a completely typical venture capital fund. The big difference is that any returns generated, any and all returns generated, go back into the fund. So nothing is distributed out to the investors. So think of the investors as basically donors, which they are. So when you invest in the fund, it's investing in a 501c3. So it's just like a donation. The fund itself, basically, the hypothesis is that there are very strong investment opportunities in the type 1 diabetes space. But it's a very specific disease. It doesn't have a huge patient population like heart disease, for example. But our thesis is that it still can generate great returns for investors. And there is, as you know, such a dearth of capital available supporting therapies for the type 1 diabetes market. That actually is being borne out because the fund has now made 11 investments in the almost 2 years that it's been in existence. And we've got $65 million so far in the fund. So it shows that there's both interest on the investor side, but there's also plenty of opportunities for the fund to really invest in and support the type 1 diabetes space. And it's also, I think, filling a void in terms of the fact that it's both mission and return driven. And because it's a higher risk vehicle than what you would think of as a typical venture capital fund, because it's not diversified among different diseases. It's focused on type 1 diabetes. So you wouldn't be able to have this in the typical venture capital world. But it's so far, I think, we're a little bit surprised at our success. But it's been really gratifying to know that, we're able to have impact right away.
Pardon my ignorance on the venture capitalist side. It's not something I know a lot about. Do the investors, and as you say, they are donating, are those investors coming from within the type 1 community? Are these the walk donations? Are these separate? Or are you looking for people outside who have money to donate to a good cause?
Anybody's welcome to invest. They are larger donors, so it's not going to be a walk donation. It's raised separately from the typical walk or gala types of events. The minimum donation is $500,000 over 4 years.
It is slightly larger than a walk donation.
Yes,
I see. Okay, no, that helps. I wasn't quite sure on what we were talking about.
Excellent. And, the interesting thing is that almost all the donations have been incremental, so we haven't seen cannibalization from our regular donor base. So that's why I was saying it was, we were viewing it as a success also for kind of investors/donors, because there are people who are now coming into and bringing significant funds into the type 1 space that were sitting on the sidelines or not previously involved.
When I entered the world of JDRF, I thought they were only focused on finding a cure, which is a wonderful thing, and I'm glad that JDRF still is. But I was surprised to find out along the way how many other things had been going on behind the scenes, and more recently, just development of CGM, the closed loops that are coming, things like that. What surprised you along the way with JDRF?
I will say that the level of support and community engagement surprised me, because I thought of JDRF and coming in cold, not knowing anything really about JDRF, I thought of JDRF as purely a research organization. And, while that is still absolutely front and center on the mission, research and advocacy, there's a significant amount of resources at JDRF in terms of, offering support, sharing best practices, connecting people. One of the really important things I found out about this disease is that there are a lot of questions that you have just day-to-day living that you can't call your endo about. And your endo often will not even know the answer to it. So having that community, knowing other people who have been through it before, going through it now, and being able to access that easily, I think is really key for good health outcomes. And so I think that was what surprised me, is that there are resources like that at JDRF, and that in fact is, one of the kind of key activities that happens particularly at the chapter level, which I think reflects JDRF's kind of grassroots nature and history, given that the whole organization was started by moms, right?
Yeah.
And I think JDRF has really tried to stay true to that kind of grassroots feeling, and the chapter mechanism is one of those ways in doing that. I'm involved. There's a online diabetes support group at JDRF where people can submit questions, and then they get farmed out to different volunteers who might have expertise in different areas. So the number of times that I respond to a question of, I don't know anybody else, how do I find somebody? On the one hand, it's troubling, but on the other hand, it's so great to be able to say, hey, there's a chapter that's just a few miles away, and I've copied the executive director. And that, to me, that is of significant value.
How's your daughter doing?
Knock on wood, she's doing great. Although she's 23, right? So I think the last time I saw her A1C was when she was a sophomore in college.
Hey, that's great. In other words, diabetes didn't ruin your relationship, and she's an independent adult?
She's an independent adult. She is off the payroll.
And she still talks to you.
She still talks to me. She's on a CGM. She's not on a pump. No interest at all in a pump. But she seems to be doing fine. She hasn't been to the ER. Yeah, exactly. So, fingers crossed. But, that's one of the really horrible things about this disease, is that at every age and every stage there's something else that's challenging, that keeps you up at night, that you can't do anything about, that makes you feel helpless. And, we went through the high school years. You say we had a good relationship. High school was a little
Well, that's
dicey.
I have a teenage daughter who doesn't have type 1, so that's just high school.
Yeah. But, and then college was a whole other set of challenges. And, at college I thought, okay, she's an adult. We don't have frat parties. But, now she travels and she's in a hotel room by herself. And, it's a whole different set of questions and concerns, and, it's...
I was going to ask if you thought you'd stop your advocacy or stop working with JDRF after she was an independent adult. I think I got my answer.
Yeah. Yes, you did. I tell my friends, if on my epitaph the one thing could be Karen helped to find a cure for type 1, that I would be so happy. That would be accomplishing my life's mission.
Karen, thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so pleased to talk to you, and I really appreciate all that you're doing.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, it makes a big difference. I was talking about connecting, and that's what you do.
More information about the fund and about Karen and the Bay Area chapter, all at diabetes-connections.com. You know, I was really glad to have Tandem come on the show. As you may have known if you're a longtime listener, they are one of our new sponsors this year. And we have another new sponsor and a new segment. I'm calling it Tell Me Something Good, from the folks at Real Good Foods. Now, this is the best story. Have you heard about Real Good Foods? Low carb, high in protein, and great people. Their CEO got a letter a while back from a 9-year-old with type 1, and it was all about how happy he was to have a yummy pizza that he could eat with his friends, that his parents felt good about, and that only had 8 carbs. Now, Real Good Foods isn't a diabetes company, but that letter made them realize they wanted to do more in our community. I am so excited to have them on board. I'll be telling you about their pizza, their poppers, and more. Benny loves their food, and we're fine with regular pizza, but he chooses the Real Good Foods items. They are awesome. Find out more at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. Tell Me Something Good is just that. I'm asking for you to send in your good news stories. They can be a diaversary, a kid changes his inset or goes to camp for the first time and has a good experience. It can be not exactly diabetes related. Maybe you've been working on a big goal, athletic or at work, or you made it through another day, because there are days like that. I have had a few recently, but I'm going to be sharing some stories. I think you'll get the hang of it. And I think this is going to be fun this year. Kathleen wrote in on Facebook, "Last week, my 8th grade Girl Scout troop had been working on their Science of Happiness badge and learned that by doing random acts of kindness for others, you can boost your own happiness. They decided to do a kindness mob and hand out flowers to unsuspecting strangers during our normal meeting time on a Friday night. So I asked if anyone was a florist in a professional moms group. One mom is a funeral director, and that very morning had laid her aunt to rest. She gave us 3 beautiful arrangements for free that would have otherwise been thrown out. Turns out, this aunt was a particularly kind and happy person. Our Girl Scouts had a great time that night, handing out flowers first at the commuter train station, then a shopping center. Some of the reactions were very funny, and some were very sweet. After the girls gave out the flowers, we asked them how it felt to make others happy. They were ecstatic. And then we told the girls where the flowers came from, and they became very sentimental. It gave them pause and appreciation, and they loved that the flowers themselves were meaningful. It made their gesture that much more special. I have been these girls' leader since 2nd grade, and now they are in 8th and taller than me. They often surprise me. That lovely woman who lost her aunt and donated those flowers was made a little happier when she learned what we did. My troop was happier, and hopefully all who received flowers were made a little happier too. What is also special, I have 2 T1Ds in my troop of 8 girls. My daughter, diagnosed almost 2 years ago, and another sweet girl diagnosed 10 years ago. Kathleen, thank you so much for sending that in, for sharing that terrific story, for starting off our Tell Me Something Good segment with such a positive and wonderful story. You can email me with the subject line Something Good, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com, or in the Facebook group. I'll be posting weekly and soliciting your responses, so don't miss that in the Facebook group. I hope we get to share a lot of really good stuff, big and small, this year. Before I leave you this week, a quick preview of what's coming up. I'm trying a lot of new things this year, really listening to you, give you more of what you want to hear on a program like this. So, always let me know what you think. I'm happy to respond, good, bad, and otherwise, not an issue there. The show is for you and for the diabetes community. So if there's something that you are, feel very strongly about, please drop me a line. I'm going to start reading reviews and emails again on next week's show. Next week's show, I'm so excited about. We have an advice segment with my dear friend, Maura McCarthy. I got this idea when we were together at a conference, and I thought, we have got to do this. It's like Dear Abby, but with 2 yentas. So we're going to have a lot of fun with that. And of course, all of the type 1 news and information and inspiration that we can fit in. And a little bit later in the month of January, and something I hope to make a regular feature, I'm going to be talking to endocrinologists and CDEs and other educators about some very basics of type 1 diabetes. I feel like we're getting a lot more newly diagnosed folks in our community who really are looking for basic information. So I'm going to be doing something I'm calling Diabetes 101, and that will be the last show of the month, every month. We'll see how it goes. Again, hey, it's for you. Let me know what you think. Thanks as always to my editor, to John Buchanan at Audio Editing Solutions. I hope you start out 2019 in a terrific way. I hope you had a great holiday season and that you're ready to go. Here's to a great 2019. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.